dealing with this for a minute. I know Oprah Winfrey has a position where just forget about the word, don't use it. I remember when they had some kind of ceremony where they were supposed to be burying the word. You know, sometimes that kind of stuff is farcical. The thing that I always say is the unfortunate part in our generation, especially from our generation of hip hop, and I come from that first generation, Sugar Hill Gang, Grandmaster Flash, Furious 5, Curtis Blow. We were the generation of hip hop that nobody believed in. We were that first wave where they were like, it's a fad, it's not musical. So the first rejection, I should say, came from our people. We didn't get embraced. And I understood, and I always said that the thing that wasn't happening is nobody was breaking down the fact that it was a taste issue more than it was a moral issue. Because I could understand my mother not liking hip hop or not liking the beats or the music or the lack of melody, so to speak. But there was so much social value going on that the most unsung thing that happened in hip hop in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, just by hip hop's existence in the South Bronx, Harlem and Brooklyn, we basically annihilated gang violence. It was like it became very corny to be in a gang. And there were guys that were in a rival gang, Grandmaster Melly Mel from Grandmaster Flash's group and Keith Cowboy. They were two rival gangs and they wound up being in a rap group together. So that was to show you just the power of annihilating that. Africa Bambaataa created the Zulu Nation under the auspices of getting the gangs together and formulating this energy and putting it towards hip hop. So there was so much more social value going on. At the same time, which is what we call the term of endearment, using the N-word was almost like hip hop's way, and hip hop has a way of doing this. You have to remember nomenclature, slang. We take stupid and make it dope and make it positive, so to speak. What happens is what gets lost in language and gets lost in translation is as you leave your neighborhood, the average person doesn't know each neighborhood slang. So the problem that we really feel is it is more generational than anything. And I say this, I, out of natural instinctive respect, don't use the word with anybody that is older than me around them. If I walk in a room, my grandmother's got some people in there, I automatically turn that off out of respect because there's an emotional connection to that. On the other hand, which I try to say to those that are older, it's very hard to translate an emotional connection because the kids that came up after that didn't feel what that is. So it doesn't mean we're not aware, it doesn't mean that we don't respect slavery and what our ancestors went through to get us here, but psychologically and emotionally, we don't feel what you felt. If you say the N-word around a person that comes from the South, that was something that was heard before they strung somebody up, before they hung somebody. And unfortunately, the biggest part of our the lacking, I should say, and this is from the hip hop generation, I'm calling it hip hop generation, is history, and I remember this vividly. I like math and science. Well, you couldn't call me a nerd because I could really fight. But those connotations, those things that went without saying, like if you did your schoolwork, you were corny. Nobody said that out loud, but there was this vibration where you either dumbed yourself down to quote unquote be cool, which is the whole genesis of my name. I was a smart guy and I'm like, smart is gonna be cool. And if you think that you're a thug or you go whatever, let's put our hands up and fight, which is what Wild Wild West is based on. So there's a through line to all of that. But basically saying, from a generational standpoint, the elders were so turned off by their musical taste that they didn't see the value. And I think at a time where they could have been more mentoring, so to speak, and that started to happen a little bit later when I started to meet Quincy Jones and I started to meet the Gladys Knights and I started to see that the elders that were in the quote unquote musical fraternity, they saw what it was because Quincy lived through bebop. He understood that a lot of our jazz greats were on drugs, but they still had the gift. So he understood it from a spiritual space. And what's lacking in the whole conversation is we're going after currency, but we're lacking spiritual currency. And because we lack spiritual currency, we don't see that as racism, sexism, ageism, and classism. And in the ageism part of the paradigm, we keep dividing ourselves based on taste. I don't necessarily like a lot of the quote-unquote newer hip-hop, but I would never go out and do what a lot of my comrades do and say, oh, Lil Wayne ain't so-and-so, or this person ain't so-and-so, whatever, because I understand the social value and where they come from. And a lot of times what's happening is poverty is traumatizing. And a lot of people don't really understand how traumatizing poverty is. So what happens is it creates a space where we become linearly focused on the money side of the equation, and it gets to a space where we're so wrapped up in whatever's going to sell that we're taking our cues where it's like art imitating life, then it turns around and becomes life imitating art. So the pressure we put on ourselves, materialistically in particular, is what makes that thing. And I always say again, I won't say the names, that there's a very prominent hip hop artist that says, I still use the N-word because there's a difference between black people and N-words. So we want you to make that separation when you see certain people. So I understand both sides of the equation. I understand both sides of the argument. I always say, just out of respect, when you're around the elders, for the guys, just turn it off because they have an emotional connection that you couldn't understand. But in a lot of cases, what you guys don't realize too, you need to have the language to survive in certain areas, because if you walk in a certain area and you say hello, it's like, what you mean hi? You better say, what's up, what up, nigga? You gotta say something to make yourself, quote unquote, acceptable around certain social environments in order to, it's a way of survival. And hip hop was the first voice to actually show, again, they took music out of the system. They took music, Reagan took music out of high schools and elementary when we were coming up in the 80s. So there's a magic in hip hop creating music in spite of as opposed to because of. And when you put the N-word in the term of endearment, we're talking about it from a coexistence and a struggle that we understand. And we understand, again, I don't have to sell drugs. I don't have to do anything negative, but even getting to the train to get to school, I gotta navigate through these drug dealers and some of these crackheads. So the N-word is very helpful in those situations.